Well, the government's legislation to ban people under 16 from using social media sites and apps is pretty simple. TikTok, Snapchat, Instagram, X, Facebook and Reddit are named as sites where under 16s will no longer be allowed to have an account. If the site doesn't comply, it could face a potential $50 million fine. Now, the object is pretty clear: to prevent harm from bullying and, say, body shaming to those not old enough to be able to walk away or simply to ignore the criticism. Questions do remain, though, about how the sites will verify the ages of all of its users. But there's also the point that the tech companies themselves may change their products here in Australia, affecting all users. Stephen Scheeler is the former chief executive of Facebook in Australia and now the founder of the brain mapping company Omniscient Neurotechnology, and joins me now. Stephen, many thanks for your time.
Good to be here.
Look, this is really sort of one of those issues where if the big tech companies take umbrage at the government and what it's done, because you know there's a whole range of organisations come out against this move by the government, then they could take punitive action against the government. Do you sense they will?
Well, I hope it doesn't come to that, and I sense that there'll be a middle ground that gets met. I am not the biggest fan of the tech giants in terms of the products they build, and I think the lack of care taken in some of those products in terms of their effect on our political ecosystem, our news ecosystem, the mental health of our users, particularly the youth. But I think we need to be balanced in how we think about how we regulate, and I think this legislation goes a little too far. If the government insists on going down this path, i.e., 100% compliance, the platforms have to keep people under 16 off the platforms, they get slapped with fines for not doing so, there is a chance that there could be a reaction against Australia that could be fairly severe in terms of withdrawing some of the services and products that these platforms offer.
Is it a good thing that Australia is seen to be global leading in a whole lot of action it's taking against tech giants? The News Media Bargaining Code forced them into paying media organisations. Now, quite clearly, Meta, Facebook, backed out of that. And really, that caused hurt inside some newsrooms. They were relying on that money. In this particular case, again, Australia is seen to be world leading in this. Other places clearly watch this, but the reality is that Australia is less than 2% of the world's population, less than 2% of their revenues and profits.
Well, as an Australian citizen, I'm happy my government's fighting for to preserve the information ecosystem of Australia so that it's good for democracy. I think that's what the Media Bargaining Code was about. Now, who won or lost in that battle, I think you can debate. And the fact that Facebook finally essentially pulled out of it, I think shows that they have the flexibility to be able to say, hey, we're going to squish you. You're 2% of the world's economy. We'll make an example of you, and we don't want a precedent set for other markets. So I like the fact the Australian government, be it this government or formula, is standing up. But on the other hand, we need to be very balanced in how we think about how we do these regulatory moves, and we need to coordinate with other countries because the tech giants are they're global players, but they're not beholden to anyone in some sense. So they can play different countries off against each other. And I think that's what you're seeing now.
And that's one of the important issues. We just showed a graphic a moment ago, which basically looked at the amount of revenue that these tech giants, some of the big tech giants, earn here in Australia versus the amount of tax they pay. Just have a look at this. So Apple, $12.6 billion worth of income tax, paid $141 million. Facebook, or Meta if you like, $1.26 billion, $38 million worth of tax. Google, you can see, is big, $2 billion worth of revenue, $124 million worth of tax. This is the whole point. Not only have governments here, but other parts of the world try to get the big tech giants to pay more of their tax in the place in which they're domiciled, but these new laws also are now putting more pressure on these organisations. But in global terms, that amount of money, though big to Australia, is relatively small to a Google, an Apple, a Facebook, or whatever it might be, isn't it?
Exactly. I mean, we have a situation. I know the government has proposed, for example, this new legislation, a $50 million penalty for different violations. I'm not sure if you dig into that, how frequently would that penalty be applied?
Is what they say.
But $50 million, I'm going to give you a sense. Meta, my former employer, they earn that in 2 hours, right? The average Australian worker would earn $100 in 2 hours. It's like a parking fine, right? Yeah. So it's really a wrist slap in that sense. So the penalties have to be bigger in order to get them to take notice. But also, it is the precedent, though, that this legislation is being watched all over the world.
And any risk that say, a Meta, for example, could just simply pull out of Australia? Turn off Instagram. That would send a message.
Yeah, I mean, look, what did we see a few years ago? We saw them turn off news in Australia at one point when they were going through the negotiation with the government over the media bargaining code. There is a scenario where they say we're going to turn off a lot of our functionality to remove ourselves from this, from the complication of legislation and regulation in that market.
That's almost filibustering in some way, isn't it?
It is a big move, right? Because they can't do that in every market, right? Ultimately, you have no business, you have no platform. But I think what we're seeing, though, is we're seeing this clash now, which has been coming for a long time, which is the rise of these platforms and AI. And there's a lot of good people inside these companies trying to build great platforms. And there's a lot of good that things like the internet and social media do. However, there are a lot of negative externalities. And this is one of those that we're seeing now, the effect on things like mental health. And so we've got to get on top of this to try to deal with it. I think it is a bit draconian to try to stop everybody under 16 from being on the platforms. But I'm encouraged that the government's making steps, and hopefully we'll wind up in the middle where there's a happy medium.
Stephen Scheeler, always great to chat, and many thanks for your time today.
My pleasure.
There you go.